...2009 was undeniably an iconic year. It was the year where Avatar broke all previous box office records, the world lost pop icon Michael Jackson, and it was the year that Kanye West made himself look a right plank by interrupting Tay-Tay's VMA acceptance speech. It was also a great time for gamers, with the likes of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 delighting players all year round. Sadly, the games on offer weren't all winners. From foul first-person shooters to substandard sports titles, the year really did have the lot. And we're back once again to remind you of all the horrors. The rules of this list are the same as always. We've taken a look at Metacritic and game rankings to find the most abhorrent games of the year 2009. A title must have had at least 7 professional reviews in order to qualify, and in the instance the averages differ between the two sites, we're going with whichever is the lowest. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of 2009. Number 10, Valhalla Knights, Elder Saga. We, 35%. If nothing else, you've got to hand it to developers K2 for their persistence in trying to make the Valhalla Knights series work. Sadly, not a single game in the series holds a score above 53% on Metacritic, and the worst of the bunch is their Wii effort, Elder Saga. The first thing critics noticed about Elder Saga was just how awful it looked. The colour palette never ventured outside of shades of brown and grey, making it difficult for players to see what was going on. The low-resolution textures didn't help either, and on top of all of that, the frequent weather effects made it utterly impossible to get a view of the action. The problems didn't end there though, as Elder Saga's gameplay was broken as all heck. Close-range combat was hampered by unskippable attack animations that just left players open to enemy retaliation, and ranged combat fared no better thanks to the lack of any kind of targeting system. You might think that Elder Saga was the nail in Valhalla Knights' coffin, however, the series plodded on for one more game. It did fare slightly better with critics, but was still considered mediocre at best. Oh well, you tried, K2. You really tried. Number 9, Astro Boy the video game, DS, 34%. We come now to the first, but certainly not the worst, of the movie tie-in games on this list with Astro Boy the video game. A platformer for the Nintendo DS based on Astro Boy the movie, which was, at least according to critics, not all that special either. The main issue with the game stemmed from its controls. Astro Boy's attacks were pretty lackluster, though this didn't really matter, as the enemy AI could be counted on not to fire until it was right up in the little lad's grill. The actual platforming wasn't much better either, as the jump command sent Astro Boy whizzing about in reckless abandon, making it damn near impossible to direct him between surfaces in any meaningful way. Even if players did manage to aim the jump correctly, however, very often the kid would slide across the floor as though the soles of his shoes were covered in butter. Admittedly, the game was meant for children, so the lack of challenge experienced by adult critics shouldn't be held against it. Children are the future though, so they shouldn't be saddled with substandard video games like this one. See, Astro Boy, you've ruined the future for everyone. I hope you're happy. Number 8, CID the Dummy, We, 31%. We could make a joke about how only a dummy would be daft enough to play this game, but that feels like low-hanging fruit. We'll also try not to think too hard about the fact that CID stands for Crash Impact Dummy, and therefore the game is effectively called Crash Impact Dummy, the Dummy. Grammar, people, it matters. The plot of CID the Dummy follows Cid, a crash test dummy, who, not content with his lot in life, obtains a suit from a professor that allows him to become a superhero. It's not long before he gets to test it out either, as almost immediately, the professor's daughter is kidnapped, and it's up to Cid, rather than, let's say, the police, to retrieve her. The story itself is pretty rubbish, but it's made far worse by the horrible voice performances from actors that sound like they couldn't care less. The technical aspects aren't great either. The graphics wouldn't have been out of place on the Nintendo 64, the fixed camera often failed to show important bits of the environment, and the whole thing controlled badly. So in summary, horrible plot, horrible voice acting, and the whole thing didn't even work properly. Our recommendation if you bought a copy? Well, simple. Find it and throw it into oncoming traffic. Number 7, Tunnel Rats 1968, PC, 30%. We've seen some horrible protagonists in our time, but it's not often we come across one quite as detestable as Tunnel Rats 1968's ostensible hero, Brooks. He is, of course, just one of a whole bunch of different problems with the game, but had he been a bit more sympathetic, critics might have been as well. Tunnel Rats 1968 was a tie-in for the Uwe Boll movie Tunnel Rats, and follows Brooks as he becomes stranded behind enemy lines whilst on a mission during the Vietnam War. I think I see your problem right there. You've got Uwe Boll caught up in your video game. It's going to be a costly fix, I'm afraid. The problem with Brooks was that he had absolutely no redeeming qualities. He was cruel, petulant and deranged, and the mechanic in which he collected ears from dead Vietnamese soldiers in order to regain health was considered to be in particularly poor taste. On top of its terrible protagonist, Tunnel Rats 1968 suffered from all of the other characteristics of a bad game. Poor voice acting, monotonous dated graphics, and various bugs, some of which rendered entire levels literally unplayable. The rest were just figuratively unplayable. Number 6, Shell Shock 2, Blood Trails, Xbox 360, 28.19%. It seems like 2009 was a terrible year for depictions of the Vietnam War, and despite Tunnel Rats 1968 being bad, first-person shooter Shell Shock 2 Blood Trails somehow managed to be worse. As a reminder, Shell Shock 2, you were more rubbish than something that Uwe Boll put his name to. Let that one sink in for a second. In Shell Shock 2 Blood Trails, players step into the shoes of Nate Walker, a US soldier deployed in Vietnam, as he tries to find his missing brother, all whilst battling enemy forces and zombies. Because everything's better with zombies, right? Shell Shock 2's main issue was that it was a mediocre game in a sea of far superior FPS titles, and it wasn't long before critics began comparing it unfavourably to the likes of the Halo and Call of Duty series. Not only was it bland and derivative in terms of its plot and game design, but it also suffered from numerous control problems and broken AI. Really, the only thing that Shell Shock 2 had going for it was that it was incredibly short, so at least those who did buy it only had to put up with the pain for a few hours. Number 5, Dragon Ball Evolution, PSP, 28%. We've got a bit of a rare treat for you now, as we look at a movie tie-in game that's actually slightly better than its source material, at least if you go by its 15% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Dragon Ball Evolution is still by all accounts a horrible game, but at least it isn't the very worst thing to ever happen to the franchise. The game allegedly follows the same plot as the film, i.e. Goku and pals set out to defeat the evil Lord Piccolo as he attempts to get hold of all of the Dragon Balls and take over the world. In terms of gameplay, Dragon Ball Evolution the game was an arcade-style fighter, but unlike titles such as Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, it offered nothing in the way of a challenge, with one reviewer even going as far to claim that he was able to complete the entire thing by just pushing square repeatedly. If the shoddy fighting mechanics weren't enough to stop players from rushing out to buy Dragon Ball Evolution, then the rest of the game sure would have been. There's supposedly a story, but there was little within the game to back that claim up, and the stages all looked like they were lifted from generic Fighter Town, resulting in a title that was more painful than taking a Kamehameha to the face. That's a Dragon Ball thing, right? Kamehameha? Yeah? Alright. Number 4, Rogue Warrior, PS3, 27%. Hang on a minute, this can't be right. Let me just call the writer. Oh, yes, hello writer. There appears to have been some mistake in the worst of 2009 script. Why is our boy Dick Merchenko on here? What do you mean the video game wasn't very good? Blasphemy! Indeed, as much as it pains us to admit, Rebellion Developments, a Bethesda Softworks first-person shooter, loosely based on the exploits of decorated Navy SEAL Richard Marchenko, RIP, was pretty much universally panned. Set in 1986, Rogue Warrior follows everyone's favourite Dick as he attempts to infiltrate North Korean territory in order to uncover a mole who has top-secret information on a ballistic missile project. Not only was the game incredibly short and not particularly fun to play, but it was also completely broken. It claimed to have stealth elements, but most enemies had their backs to Dick anyway, rendering a stealth approach completely unnecessary. That is, until players tried to actually shoot anything, you know, the whole point of an FPS, because the hit detection was so shoddy that it was a roll of the dice whether or not enemies would go down. It's alright Dick, we still love you. Number 3, NBA Unrivaled, PS3, 24%. There are a number of ways that NBA Unrivaled lived up to its name, and chief among them was that it was unrivaled when it came to just how shoddy it was. Well, there are still 2 games to go on this list, so it's not completely unrivaled, but you get the point. Though NBA Unrivaled was a budget title, it was still unforgivably bad at what it was trying to do, i.e. be a basketball game. Part of the problem seemed to stem from the fact that Unrivaled didn't seem to know what kind of basketball game it wanted to be. So while it drew elements from both sports simulations and arcade titles, it never succeeded at either. The animations were choppy, making it difficult for players to control the game with any degree of success, and there were also various bugs and glitches that would cause the character models to just disappear. Matches also suffered from poorly implemented rubber banding, so frustrated gamers would often find that players suddenly developed a serious case of the butterfingers the second they were a couple of baskets ahead. Not only is NBA Unrivaled one of the worst games of 2009, but according to our friends at Metacritic, it's also the worst basketball game ever made. Number 2, Stalin vs Martians, PC, 23.41%. I really wish I could have been in whatever boardroom it was that came up with the idea of pitting Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin and all of his comrades against intergalactic adversaries. I hope that whoever was responsible got some sort of severe telling off. Admittedly, Stalin vs Martians clearly wanted players to know it didn't take itself too seriously, somewhere in between blasting the Russian national anthem and getting players to declare whether or not they liked cats. The developers forgot to take things seriously enough to make a good game. Mostly critics were upset at the fact that, despite claiming to be a real-time strategy game, Stalin vs Martians didn't really have all that much in the way of RTS elements, instead opting for a more arcade-like gameplay style. This wouldn't have been a problem if it had even been able to do that well, but trying to control units was a frustrating endeavour, and each level was either insultingly simple or lengthy to the point of tedium. There was some entertainment to be had from all the shoehorned Soviet cliches, but these quickly wore thin once players realised the game, on the whole, was less fun than a weekend in the Gulag. And number 1, Leisure Suit Larry, box office bust, PS3, 16%. Sometimes our writers have a difficult time coming up for funny things to say about the games we cover on this channel. Then there's other times, as is the case here, where the jokes really do write themselves. A bust in literally every sense of the word, Leisure Suit Larry Box Office Bust was the 8th game in the Leisure Suit Larry series, and saw protagonist Larry Lovage trying to uncover a mole that threatens to ruin his uncle's film studio. Anyone familiar with the Leisure Suit Larry series will know not to expect highbrow humour, but Box Office Bust's constant barrage of blue jokes quickly became tiresome for even the biggest fans of naughty comedy. Still, the mute button exists, so perhaps turning the volume down left players with a more reasonable experience? In short, no, because even without all of the witticisms, Box Office Bust was no fun to play. The content of levels did vary, and the game had a shot at platforming, stealth, shooting and fighting, but it did none of them competently. Bizarrely, the game managed to attract the talents of Carmen Electra and Patrick Warburton, neither of whom put in bad performances, but sadly they weren't enough to save this titanic mess of a game.